Welcome to Everything Life Coaching with John Kim and Noelle Cordeaux, founders of JRNI Coaching. If you're inspired to begin your own life coaching practice or just want to learn a little bit more about what it's all about, visit jrni.co. That's JRNI.co.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about signature themes, but before we do, Noelle, I have a fun fact for you.
Yes.
I was reading a book called Moonshots, and so information in this world used to double every 100 years, and then I think around the Industrial Revolution, it was information was doubling around 25 years. Today, guess how fast information doubles? It blew my mind.
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
Every 12 hours.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, it makes sense, obviously, because the internet and the the hockey stick of just how fast the world is changing. But holy shit, every 12 hours, the information in this world is doubling.
And I think you and I are contributing to that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's great about this, bringing it back to coaching, the amount of knowledge, the amount of ways we can help people, the amount of doors we could go into self-betterment and all the different categories of wellness is just it's like stars in the sky. It's endless.
It is. And something that I think about a lot is there's, this sense of how am I going to do this? And, then you get into the field and you realize that your options for communicating with people are limitless.
Oh, man. Yeah. And, within our lifetime, I've just seen, and I don't know whose lifetime would be the generation that sees the most. Maybe I know that my probably our great grandmothers who actually grew up with like buggy trailer and now are able to have access to the internet. Maybe that generation, I'm not sure, but it's moving at such a rapid rate that it's part terrifying and part super exciting.
Oh yeah. And just think about in your daughter's lifetime.
Yeah.
What's going to happen and what she's going to see, that it's astounding.
Yeah, and I think for me, as someone who's a coach and also has a clinical background, just during my lifetime in the last decade, I'm sure you felt it too, the world of wellness and how we learn and how we educate and how we help other people it's probably the most exciting time ever.
I completely agree. And in addition to that, I've seen so much really high level discourse about the collective state of fear and suffering. And there's this growing wave of optimism accompanying the wellness industry and the wellness market itself, saying, there is an entire industry that's basically dedicated to building hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like there's very little tolerance now for negativity and living in the past and, all of the stuff that makes us stuck.
And we can only hope that it continues to grow and surge because,
Absolutely.
When you look out into the world, one of the things that we know from positive psychology and resiliency theory is that it's never black and white. Things are never terrible without also being very, very good.
Right. And so training your mind to see the good in an authentic, honest way is so powerful.
And we're contributing to the information superhighway right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about signature themes.
Yeah, and spreading hope, right? Because that's why we're coaches. There's something in us that wants to be of service to others. So you're familiar with the concept of signature themes based on your clinical training. And do you want to give a rundown on what this stuff is, how it works in therapy land?
Yeah, so in therapy land, we have to be careful and be aware of what we are projecting onto our clients. So, for example, if I am talking to a client about, say, a marriage, say that I'm not monogamous, but my client is, I have to be careful not to put my shoulds or definitions or triggers any of it, onto the client, because with any human exchange, there's going to be stirring, on both sides. And so I think for coaches, we also have that responsibility, because even though we're not therapists, we still experience a lot of things when we're, having conversations, especially deep conversations with our clients.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And so today, what we're highlighting is a piece of education that we created specifically for JRNI and specifically for our intensive, because you and I have really diverse backgrounds. So where you came from the clinical path and moved into coaching, I actually started out on the coaching path with an executive coaching certification, co-joined with a master's in org development, and then went on to explore a PhD in human sexuality. So when I was in that world of human sexuality and I was learning about all of this stuff from a therapeutic perspective of what it's like to be in session when you're bound by the medical model and you're bound by all of the rules and regulations that govern licensure, it struck me that coaches are not trained in the same way.
That's right.
Yeah, coaches are traditionally trained to draw a line in the sand and step gingerly away from anything that's delivered in the therapeutic range. And while that is good and fair and ethical on a lot of levels, it doesn't take into account the experience of the coach themselves. And everybody who works with humans deserves to have access to really high-level graduate education, whether or not you ever choose to set foot inside a university, that will help you understand yourself in context and help you avoid being triggered in session or triggering someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that if you are not aware of this and processing this, working on this, you could also burn out, because sessions can become very exhausting and you might not know why.
Exactly. And we've seen that happen a lot, where folks have come through our doors at JRNI and they think they want to work on one thing, and they get into those sessions with the client and they're in pain. And they choose not to do it anymore. And that's okay. That's okay. It's always okay to change your mind, no matter what you're doing.
Absolutely. But also signature themes then is also in a way self-care for
It
a
is.
coach. Yeah.
It's self-care and it's self-reflection. And that's really what we're talking about here, is intentional and active self-reflection that will give you tools that you need. So let's go into the theoretical underpinnings of this work. So Freud was the first one to require that his students engage in psychoanalysis on themselves so that they could get ahead of or become aware of their own issues before working with people. And he used to train folks in his living room on lots of cocaine.
And also a lot of hours.
They weren't
50-minute sessions.
No. So he was the first one to do it. And then there's, a really rich history moving into the realm of social work. Two of my favorite theorists in this work are Virginia Satir and Bowen. So Satir focused on the lived enactment of forgiveness and mending. And her theories really say that if you've struggled with relationship and suffered pain in life, go find that person, mend the fences, and give them a hug, and really do it. Truly do it, because life is short, and psychologically, it will be to your benefit to engage in forgiveness. And then Bowen was really focused on family dynamics, structural systems family, and Bowen's theories say that the largest work of your adult life is to overcome your relationship with your family of origin.
Yes. And also and this is what I love about Bowen, is by raising your differentiation of self. And that's the whole thing, where after learning about that, where I started talking about containers and the pseudo versus solid. It really resonated with me.
Yeah, can you give a definition of differentiation?
Yeah, it's I mean, just like street level, it's basically um it's basically, this whole idea of not exchanging your truth for membership. It's knowing who you are and feeding that truth instead of disappearing by trying to fulfill other people's needs, or pretending to be someone you're not. It's living in your solid self, and I think especially in families, because those dynamics are so powerful, it's very easy to lose yourself and have a very weak stance, and that's when you triangle and you do all these things where you have a lot of anxiety, and the family unit then has power over you and stunts your individual growth.
Yeah, and it's not, and it's so interesting when we really get down to this stuff, because it's the family unit, and it's also the stories that the family tells about the way the world is and what's right and what's wrong, and that really feeds into a lot of social construction theory, the list of shoulds that exist for a given person, which can get deep and wide. And so, guys, as you're listening, one of the important things to understand is that every single one of us is subject to this stuff. No one gets out scot-free. All of us come from a family of origin.
Right. Well, we all come from families. No family is perfect. No child enters adulthood unscarred, and then we all live in societies, so that construct is also there too.
Yeah, 100%. So we can really find a lot of compassion. I think when we start talking about this stuff, people, when I teach it in class, I watch body language and I start to see kind of shoulders go down, and people start to say, "Oh," and there's this feeling that accompanies it. But what we know from connecting to all of humanity through self-compassion studies is you can feel better by looking out into the world and recognizing that every single person who is walking down the street alongside of you has felt something similar at one time or another.
Right, absolutely. And I think in that way, there is a sense that we're all connected. There's a sense that we've all been through what we're all struggling with, even though we have different stories. A lot of the things that we all struggle with are the same. They're thematic.
They're the same, and they're thematic, with nuanced differences, right? And that's why we're here today, is to talk about the fact that even though there are very connective broad strokes for all humans, there are nuanced differences. And so when we're doing this work of reflection to both connect to all of humanity and then connect to ourselves, is understanding ourselves and then understanding the difference.
Yes, yes, and I think probably in that order.
Yeah, absolutely. So at its core, when we're talking about doing self of the therapist work, there are two states. There's part one and there's part two. So part one is a state of awareness that you gain around your lived experience and your emotional life and the coping patterns that took place for you. And then the second part two, is mastery over those issues so that they're not showing up in session, and the session isn't about you and your story. The session is about your client and your client's story, and you're not confusing the two.
One of the questions I always get is how do you know when you're making it about you? How do you know when you're making it about the client? Like, at what point should you not be so transparent, but you need to bring it back to the client? How would you know? What do you think?
Yeah, so for me, and the way that so guys, I teach this class. This is the class that I teach. And this is where the formula of awareness combined with mastery comes in. The mastery piece is actually that verbal and intellectual control over deciding with clarity and intention to either share your story or not in order to enhance the session.
Right.
And the way that I languaged that was really important, to share your story or not in order to enhance the session. So when you're sitting there in session and you have this like internal pull, this urge to share, if it's really kind of sitting there and pulsating, that's usually tip number one that this is for you. Because you don't have like quite have control over it with intention. It's just you're dying to share, to be seen, to be
Yeah.
validated, And so the question that, and the way that I've heard you phrase it, John, to our students before is to say, is this for you or is this for the client?
Right. And I like what you said, enhancing or moving the session forward. I think that if your share is going to help the client and you have to really be honest with yourself and you believe that, then that's probably a good thing. If your share is coming from ego, if your share is coming from a showing off place or look how far I've come, then that's probably not going to build trust.
Yeah, and let me give you an example. So I've had the privilege of many, many, many people telling me these words. I think I'd like to get a divorce. Boom. And when somebody drops those words, it hits like a boulder. And I'm divorced, you're divorced. It's a big deal. It's life altering, lowers your happiness set point, all the things. So when somebody says those words, I, as a coach, have no idea where that person's at. And I can't assume where that person's at. So, even if I said something like, wow, that's terrible, it might not be.
Yeah. So like exactly. So if you give your opinion either way, either whether it's terrible or congratulations, that might not be where they're at, and so you're putting your definitions on their experience.
Yeah. So somebody tells me as a coach, I think I want to get a divorce. If I'm making it about me and I'm inappropriately sharing, I would be accessing my own memory, my own emotions, and making an assumption that that person is going to have the same experience as me. So I might say something like, "Oh my God, that's terrible. You're in for years of just horrible stuff,
Pain and suffering. You're gonna be alone for the rest of your life.
And, let me tell you about my ex-husband," right? Not good, guys. Don't do this at home. If I'm using this work, this active reflection to realize that I had a really unique experience with divorce, and just because that word might be similar to my experience, it doesn't mean that my client's going to have anything like what I experienced. So the right way to come at this stuff is somebody says, I think I want to get a divorce. And for me as a coach to say, wow, that sounds like a really big decision. I remember what it was like when that happened to me. Tell me what's going on for you.
Yeah, I think it's about not judging the event, but being with the client as far as the person centered in where they are and supporting their truth.
Yeah. And now let's talk about how to use it to enhance a session, because I think that gets blurry, right? So, when we do work around activating events, whether it's HIV or cancer or divorce or, an accident that alters someone's capacity for ableism, when somebody faces something that is really big and changes your life, the first thing that they want is to talk to somebody who's been through it and who's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because that person represents hope. The person
because that person
right.
represents hope, right? And so, and a lot of times in our marketing and the way that we share our story to let people know that there is hope, we're telling our story, we're sharing our story. It's gold. It doesn't mean that our life experience is a valid example of what a client should do in session. And remember, coaching isn't about giving advice, but it is appropriate to lend hope. So if someone's going through a divorce and they are experiencing despair and darkness and they can't find their way out, it might be appropriate for me to say, hey, I know you have a million things on your plate right now that we're working through, from the bank accounts to the mediator to childcare. It is heavy and it feels heavy for a reason. I went through it too, and I'm living proof that there is life on the other side.
Right.
So in that example, I'm centering the client, I'm validating, I'm keeping that client on task with everything that they have to do, and I'm not sharing to say, do what I did. I'm sharing to say, I'm alive, and you're going to be alive too.
Right. So instead of judging what they're going through, you're injecting hope.
Exactly. You're injecting hope. And that's the really specific thing. So there's a deeper cut of this work. And this is what I work on with our students. So if you're a coach and you feel like, wow, I never got this training, come see us. It's what we do. I'll help you sort through it. So with every activating event, we all have a really unique set of patterns and behaviors that come from that activating event. And those are the things that we have to watch out for as far as projection goes. So, with divorce, one of my personal patterns was a tendency towards codependence. John, did you experience that when you got divorced?
Sure. Absolutely. Codependence in the sense, you mean codependence in my marriage or with after my marriage?
Well, I experienced it afterwards, but not everybody does.
Right. So let me ask you this: with codependence after the marriage, did you also experience that with clients, or more so with friends and people around you, personal life?
It was mostly in my romantic relationships that I experienced codependence. But I realized that it was showing up with my clients where I was making an assumption that they were also experiencing codependence when they weren't.
Right. So for me, it was the opposite, and of course, because you and I are opposite in every category, which I love. I experienced it heavy in the marriage, less so after the marriage.
This is a great example, guys, right? So we have two really common themes. We have divorce and codependency. John and I both experience both completely differently. And so neither one of us can ever make an assumption that this is just what people experience.
Yeah, and with me, my codependency was part of the problem and probably contributed to the expiration of my marriage. And then post-marriage, it was the first time I experienced healthy independency, where I kind of, was dating myself for 3 years and learning to be with myself and sit in restaurants and not be codependent on other people and the whole, seeking approval, validation, making sure that everyone else is okay before me. All of that was just learning and growth after the marriage. But before the marriage, that was my life.
And this is so great because, again, we are total opposites. So I did the opposite of John. Instead of dating myself for 3 years, which I wish I really did, I jumped into crazy relationships.
Yeah.
And I was seeking validation through others. And it wasn't until years later when I finally started to experience healthy relationships that I was able to shake this stuff off and really come to terms with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're disclosing, what I hope that we're highlighting is how similar but different our paths can be. And I think that in all of this, where the magic comes in as coaches and really adhering to the discipline of coaching is with empathy.
Yeah, that's soil.
That's the superpower. Is
Because
that
with empathy, it doesn't matter what your story is. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter how different your story is. Empathy slices.
Exactly. And so when we're doing this reflective work, when we're tapping into our own signature themes, and you can do this with a friend, you can do this, on your own, you can do this through our intensive. John and I are talking and I'm listening to him and I'm imagining what it was like for him to date himself for 3 years. And I know John and I know LA, and I'm like, I want to hug you right now because I know what that must have been like.
Yeah, very lonely.
Right. And I'm pulling from such a place of empathy, getting into your own experience, that my experience is psychologically on the back burner right now, because I'm tuned into John, and I'm like, oh yeah, I went through that too, but it was 10 years ago and it was weird, like,
Right.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people say the word empathy like we say the word gratitude, but very few of us actually practice it. And so, when you're going through a coach training program, you actually have the space to practice active empathy, with your peers, and actually
With your
learn
peers,
learn to sharpen that tool, that muscle.
and to be trained in this stuff, because these core issues that are referred to in training as signature themes are actually your assets that can be tapped into to connect and intervene successfully with clients. And there is a science and practice to learning how to do it.
Yes, and here's the plus. It's going to make you a better human, period. Has nothing to do with even coaching. I mean, it does. It has everything to do with coaching. But even aside from that, the the byproduct is it's going to make you better in all your relationships, including the relationship with you.
Oh, yes. And my favorite thing about this work is, watching minds be blown one after the next, and then to have folks walking around outside in the world looking at all of the people on the subway platform like, oh my God, they all have signature themes and coping patterns. Every single person here has gone through this stuff. Like, oh, wow. There's deep stuff under the surface.
Guys, in the next 12 hours, the amount of information in the world is going to double. And you could either be afraid of that or take that and not only the information, but of course your story, your experience, and all the tools that you have to actually help people. And to me, it's one of the most beautiful things happening today, and there's a lot of people doing it. So if you're interested in coaching, check us out at JRNI Coaching, and we'll see you in class.
Yes. Take care. Have a great one.
Ready to cut through the BS of becoming a coach? Snag John and Noelle's 6-step guide to becoming a life coach at jrni.co/everything. That's jrni.co/everything. If what you've heard here today speaks to you and you want to learn a little bit more about becoming a coach, visit jrni.co, jrni.co. We've graduated nearly 1,000 coaches and offer vibrant community, strong lifetime support, and world-class coaching education. We're fully ICF accredited and look forward to watching how you use coaching to make a bigger impact in the world around you.